to welcome everyone to the Florida Tennis Podcast. We are so lucky to be joined once again by Steve Flink. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine, Adam. Looking forward to the discussion. Certainly it was a very compelling U.S. Open, as it almost always is. So I'm looking forward to the topics that you're going to throw my way.
Well, thanks, Stephen. Of course, it is a U.S. Open 2025 wrap-up, hence my U.S. Open 2025 shirt that I'm wearing here. For those of you, it does have Althea Gibson on the back, and we'll talk a little bit about Althea Gibson as we get into the podcast, because it was an important milestone involving Althea Gibson. But we'll get to that. But I want to start out by reminding everyone that Steve Flink is a Hall of Famer. He is a tennis historian. He's written many books. One of my favorites is The Greatest Tennis Matches of All Time. Steve, I'm guessing you're going to have to update this at some point. Can you give us a secret knowledge as to when you might be updating this bad boy?
No, you're right. It'll happen. I can't tell you exactly when.
Okay.
I have another book coming out first, which will be on the Immortals of American Tennis. That is not released until next June. So it might be the following year that I come back here. But then
Okay.
that will enable me to bring in some really great matches like the Sinner Alcaraz match we had at Roland Garros this year. There'll be a few others. It'll bring me into their eras, so to speak, because
Sure.
the last edition, the one you got, that was a big change from the original book, which was the greatest tennis matches of the 20th century, because the greatest tennis matches of all time, that's when I brought in Federer, Djokovic, Nadal. So there was a huge sea change there in the sport going on at that time, and so that it was crucial that I do the book when I did it. I have a little time now in terms of the next edition, but I suspect it'll be 2-3 years down the road, and there'll be plenty to add for the men and the women.
Well, I look forward to chatting with you about your next book when that comes out. I will be buying my signed first edition. As soon as that comes out, and look forward to talking to you about that. But let's jump to the 2025 U.S. Open. It actually began a little differently this year. We had a kind of a fan week, a mixed doubles fan week, which produced, I think, a lot of fun. I think people really enjoyed it. Your take on anything related to the mixed doubles fan week to start?
It was a great spectacle. I think highly enjoyable to watch, although you have to accept the fact that doubles these days all around, men's doubles, women's, and mixed, is played so differently than us traditionalists liked it to be played. What I mean by that is so many players stay back on serve. Now, they do it really well, and it was showcased in the U.S. Open mixed doubles. Probably nobody did it better than Jess Pegula, and then Novak was terrific while he was still in with his countrywoman, and they're able to stay back behind the serve and prevent the opposing player up at the net from poaching, because they take the ball so early and hit it so hard that almost impossible for the netman to poach. So it's enjoyable, but I must say I preferred the old brand of doubles as serving and volleying. I think that's the way it should be played. But what was great about it was that obviously Pegula has played some doubles, but people like Novak, there were so many great singles players who would not normally have entered this, but the prize money being $1 million for the top team, and the USTA trying to get these top players to do it, that was the fun of it. That's where the fans got their greatest pleasure, was seeing great singles players on the doubles court and being able to watch them in actual competitive play leading up to the single, which didn't start until the Sunday. Now, I must say, again, a criticism, I really feel that they should not play the 4-game sets. I don't see why they can't stick with no ad, but play full sets. Play the tiebreakers at 6-all. That I would change. So the format I was not fond of, but the tennis, for the fans, there's no question how much joy they got out of this event. It's just that it's not a traditional Grand Slam mixed doubles event the way we've come to know it. But it certainly did ignite interest in the singles, because, as you say, it was part of Fan Week, and then before they knew it, the singles was starting on the Sunday. It was a 15-day event for the singles this year. That's the first at the U.S. Open. French has done that for a long time, but it's a first for our major championship here. So it was an interesting week. And I think for the fans, nice to see some matches as opposed to just practice sessions. I mean, they're happy with that, but I think this one was even more to their liking to see these top players out there. And of course, the advantage, I talked about the disadvantage because I would prefer the fuller sets, but the matches moved along. You could get through a couple of rounds a day. They're able to play that all in 2 days, which is remarkable. That was the advantage. Right. But to me, that's more large scale exo. That's just my opinion. In terms of the results as opposed to anything else, because I'm not saying the players didn't try. They tried very hard and they put on a great show. But the format and the fact that you had only 16 teams, and there's certain parts of it I don't like in terms of what a major should be for mixed doubles. So be it. The USTA disagreed. I respect that.
And when you talk about the result, the interesting question going in is a great traditional doubles team going to beat two great singles players? And the answer is yes. And I thought that was kind of a fitting winning team in that scenario.
Yes.
How about you? What was your take on at least the winning team?
Yeah, I agree with that. At least in the end, we're getting Aryna and Vavasori, winning it, which was definitely fitting because they play together. They're an established team, and they ended up beating Iga Swiatek and Casper Ruud in the final, which was a very entertaining final. Iga and Casper had done a great job to beat Pegula and Draper in the semifinals, and they'd had a great tournament, and they had won their first two matches really easily, and then they won one that went down to the wire against Pegula and Draper. So a lot of people were favoring them, but it was the Italian. It was Sara Errani, who we know so well. They shined. They shined in the end, and I agree with you. That was fitting that it would end that way.
Sure.
But what was unfortunate, obviously, is that there's a certain number of teams that probably would have liked to have played that couldn't play because you have a 16 draw. So that's the trade-off. But yes, an established team won, and good for them.
Right, and I think that was a microcosm a little bit of just the excitement of this U.S. Open for me. And you were on site more than I was, but from the first ball of mixed madness to the end, there was just a level of excitement. It seemed like never-ending amount of people. It was quite the event. It was like a Super Bowl every day on steroids to me. Did you feel like a little bit like it was just really incredible this particular year?
Well, it always is. I think there were many, many pluses. You got Alcaraz and Sinner through to the finals, Novak into the semifinals. You had a rematch of the women's final from last year between Pegula and Sabalenka, this time in the semi. Then Sabalenka holding on to her title with a nice win over Anisimova in the finals, who's following up on her Wimbledon final. There were so many, and a couple of really fantastic women's matches, by the way. The Pegula-Sabalenka semifinal, which was won in 3 sets by Sabalenka coming from behind, and the Anisimova match against Naomi Osaka in the same round in the semis was spectacular as well. And Anisimova, 3 points from defeat, managed to come back from a set in 5-6 and 15 love down, or love 15 down, I should say, to win that match in 3 sets. So, and we had a number of really stirring, well-played, intriguing men's matches as well. I will say this, Adam, we've been spoiled in other years because for whatever the reasons, we got more 5-set men's matches than we did this year. Yeah, I can't really explain it, but that doesn't mean the caliber of tennis wasn't very high. In fact, I think it was. And I think part of the reason that it was is we didn't get as much oppressive weather. We got comfortable weather in the 70s. It was really a nice thing for the players not to have to deal with extreme heat very often, if at all. And that makes a difference too, because they're not compromised. There's only so much you can do to train yourself for conditions like that, and they didn't have to worry about it much. And I thought that was wonderful to have that. So yes, all told, great tournament. I'd say there were actually, following up on what I just said about the women, they might have had a few more great matches this year than the men. It might have been slightly in their favor, but what was great about the men was to see to see those three superstars all in the semifinals, which is what you kind of wanted at the start, because that meant that Djokovic played Alcaraz in the semi, with the winner playing Sinner in the final. Of course, that winner was Alcaraz, and then he won it all. So it was a really nice way to conclude the tournament, I thought, to have the right people in the semis. And then obviously in the case of the men, Felix, the Canadian. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his last name because it drives me nuts. But Felix had a great tournament, and he knocked off Zverev. He knocked off Rublev. He made it all the way to the semis. He loses to Sinner, and he also beat De Minaur. I was leaving De Minaur out, so 3 big wins for him, big wins. And then he takes a set off Sinner. Now, he'd been in the semis here 4 years ago, and so it's nice to see him following up with his best major since then. And he's always a great crowd pleaser. So I think for him to be in the latter stages like that could only be a positive for the U.S. Open. So those are the things I would cite off the top. But I know you'll want to get into more specifics here.
Well, I was going to talk. We're going to start first with the men's final, and then obviously you can talk about any matches that led that way. But of course, we had the Alcaraz Sinner final, and they split all 4 majors. This year, which is extraordinary. But take us through your take on this particular men's final.
Well,
Alcaraz and Sinner.
As you say, they split all 4 majors, and they did it last year, same way. They didn't meet in the Australian Open this final because Carlos lost to Novak in the quarterfinals. So that final was Zverev facing Sinner, and Sinner won it. But then for them to play the last 3 major finals of the season, we've never had that in the Open era in men's tennis, to have 2 guys, which is amazing when you think about it. Think back, and you followed this game very closely for a long time. Think of those 3 years as an example. Nadal and Federer, 2006 to 2008. They met in the finals of the French, followed by meeting in the finals of Wimbledon. So they met in 2, but they never met in New York. They came very close some years. They were a match point away. In 2010, Novak had came from double match point to beat Roger to prevent that final. And exact same thing happened the next year. And those were 2 Nadal-Djokovic finals there. But so they played 4 straight over 2 years. So we've never seen 3 straight over 1 year the way Sinner and Alcaraz did. So that was nice. That was a nice historical part of the equation. Now to the match, because you're asking about the match. I mean, look, their best match, obviously, by far, was the French Open final, which had so many fascinating, fluctuating fortunes, and Sinner up 2-1 and leading 5-3 in the 4th set and he's got Alcaraz at love 40 and triple match point, and he couldn't put him away. Carlos hung on for dear life, played the match points intelligently, didn't give anything away, and Sinner injured himself a bit with some errors, and so be it. And then he served for the match and couldn't close him there. And Carlos eventually wins that one in a 5th set tiebreaker after Sinner had come within 2 points of winning the match again when he led 6-5 in the 5th, Alcaraz serving 12th game of that 5th set. So that was just a gem. There were so many. It was such a intriguing and compelling match on every level. It kept you in your seat for 5 hours. You just didn't care. It didn't seem anywhere near as long as it was. It was just a jewel of a match. And then they go to Wimbledon, and this time Sinner is up 4-2 in the 1st set and loses the set. And you're thinking, oh boy, is this sort of an offshoot? Is this a carryover from Roland Garros? Is Carlos in his head here? Because that was a set you thought Sinner was in pretty good shape at 4-2, and he loses that 1st set of the Wimbledon final, but comes back, wins the next 3 sets, and served extraordinarily well those last 3 sets, and kept Carlos at bay, and won the Wimbledon title in 4 sets over Carlos. Very good match. Couldn't equal Roland Garros because it didn't go 5, but it was a very well played 4-setter. And now we go to Flushing Meadows. Sinner has been the hard court king, as you know, Adam. He won the last 2 Australians, and he won here last year. So he was kind of going for 4 hard court majors in a row. So coming into the tournament, he was the favorite. Then he had a few stumbles along the way. He had a match with Denis Shapovalov, the left-handed Canadian, Felix's countryman. And Denis took the 1st set, and before Sinner came back, but then Sinner was down 3-love in the third, and Shapovalov even had a point for 4-love before Sinner came back to win that set and to close out in 4. That was not him at his best. Then he had a couple of, after that he beat Bublik and Musetti very easily, and you thought he was back in form. But then FAA takes that set off in the semis in the match I already mentioned. So he was a bit up and down by his lofty standards. Hard to criticize somebody who only has 2 4-set matches on his way to the final, no 5-setters and some routes, but he wasn't the very best hard court Sinner that we've seen. Meantime, Carlos is coming through on his end with 6 straight set victories, culminating with the win over Novak in the semis. And keep in mind that obviously Novak had won their last match and won 4 of their last 5, but he'd won the last one in Australia in the quarters in 4 sets on hard courts as well. But Carlos was so primed for this one as he was for all of his matches, and it was nicely played. You know, Carlos won the first 6-4, and then Novak had that early break up 3-love in the second, but Carlos comes back to win in a tie break, and then Djokovic had little left in the third, and Carlos ran it out 6-2. So he comes into the final having been tested just enough, I think. Also a tough match with Lehechka in the previous round, but not losing any sets. So I must say, Adam, I kind of changed my mind. Pre-tournament, I had been picking Sinner, and I thought most of the way Sinner. But after that semi, and he had some injury issues in the semi too, we had to take a medical timeout, and you couldn't tell if he was 100% physically. I thought, you know what, Carlos is playing so well right now, and Jannik is a bit in and out by his incredible standards. So I did believe that Carlos would win, but I never believed that we would see such a one-sided 4-setter. It began with Carlos breaking Sinner in the first game of the match, and he broke him again in the 7th game, and he's breezing through on his own serve and just he's hitting the ball gloriously off the ground. The forehand never better. And Sinner was a bit off balance and ill at ease, and a one-sided set for Carlos. And at that stage, you're thinking, boy, this could turn out to be a 2-3-2 match the way Carlos is playing. But to his credit, Sinner broke Alcaraz at love to go up 3-1 second set. And then he holds serve throughout that set. He did a very nice job in his own serve. That was the only set where he didn't get broken. And he wins the second 6-3. And now you're thinking the opposite. You're thinking, okay, this is great. They're 1 set all. We have a potential for 5. At the very least, it's going to be close in the next 2 sets. But it wasn't. Because early in the third, Sinner missed a pretty easy forehand off Carlos's return that was sort of sitting up for him, and he was very angry with himself. He actually swatted a ball in disgust, and that put him down 2-love. And then Carlos came out of a love 30 in the next game, including an incredible overhead that he took on the bounce from the baseline and put away into the corner as only he could, because I don't know anybody else that would have put that smash away. It was pretty deep lob. Sure. And then the next thing you know, Carlos is at 5-love, and he wins the set 6-1. So 2 of the 3 sets he had won, the 2 sets he'd won leading to the 2-1 advantage, were 6-2 and 6-1. What were the chances of that? That just doesn't happen with these 2 guys. But it was a combination of Carlos's sheer brilliance, creativity, and being essentially in the zone, and Sinner being slightly off. So we go to the 4th, and Carlos gets the 1 break, I believe at 2-all it was the break, and that's all he needed. You know, again, keep in mind that it was so one-sided in the sense of Carlos's dominance on serve that aside from the 1 game that he lost on his serve in the 4th game of the second set to go down 3-1, he didn't even face a break point. So we get to the final game of the match, and he kind of coasted up till that 5-4 in the 4th. And then these 40-15 double match points. Sinner came alive. He had a great forehand to save the first match point, and a beautiful backhand down the line return off a second serve to make it deuce. And now you're thinking, oh, is this going to be his miracle? Is this going to be kind of like Carlos and Roland Garros? But it wasn't. Carlos, to his absolute credit, just settled himself and opened the court up, came in, put away an easy overhead for his 3rd match point, and then hit the serve that was really, to me, his signature serve of the match, Adam, which is the out wide in the ad court. Not the old reliable Carlos kicker. It was more of his, which he used so often on clay and hard courts, which would bound up high and really make it tough for the receiver in that ad court to do anything with the return, but not designed to be an ace, just designed to cripple them. But these serves that he was hitting in the ad court against Sinner and throughout the tournament were 127, 128, 131, 132. They were thunderbolts. And he found the corner with that last serve and fittingly ended it with an ace, because his serve, as brilliant as the rest of his game was, as much of a virtuoso performance as it was off the ground, the serve was really the anchor of his game. The serve was probably the main reason why he won this match quite so easily, because it didn't even seem like a four-setter. It was so clear-cut. It had more of a feeling in the end of being a straight-set match. So big lift for Carlos, who's now won 7 of the last 8 against Sinner. We talked at him after Wimbledon. I was optimistic then that Sinner, by winning that Wimbledon final, had kind of reset things a bit and would now be back in the rivalry. I didn't think he was going to suddenly run off 5 wins in a row the way Carlos had done against him, but I thought he would start winning his share, and at that point I would have really liked his chances at the U.S. Open. I did long term, and I did pre-tournament. But this is a blow to him. And the giveaway, Adam, was the remarks that Sinner made after the match, talking about how he's too predictable. He's going to have to make some changes. And very complimentary to Carlos, but very self-critical. And my concern there is that he doesn't go too far, that he's judicious about it. Make some minor modifications. He alluded to maybe serving and volleying once in a while. He could drop shot a bit more. That's fine, but I don't want to see him get away from the strengths that brought him to this point, which are, the consistency and the power in his game, the power of his forehand especially, and then the serve, which when on his best days can really carry him through matches as it did at Wimbledon. Unfortunately here, as great a day as Carlos had on serve, Sinner had a disappointing day, and he finished at 48% on first serves, which just is never going to work against someone as good as Alcaraz. So it was, I look at it 2 ways. A joy to watch such a sparkling Alcaraz, such an informed, determined, unwavering Alcaraz. Even the second set, he didn't play badly. It was one game that Sinner broke him. So maybe a slightly loose game from Alcaraz there, but that was the only break of that set. And you might say the only bad game he played on his serve, and it wasn't that bad a game. Sinner earned 2 of the points. Alcaraz maybe gave 2 of them away. So I admired the performance immensely. I was hoping the match itself would be tighter and better. There'd be more suspense. Because, comparing to Wimbledon, Adam, there was a lot of tension in the 4th set. Sinner, in the last 3 sets. Sinner having to kind of fight off break points, Sinner having to fend off Carlos at certain stages. Those 3 sets that he won after being down a set at Wimbledon were not easy. And that made for a better match. You weren't sure he was going to close those sets out. You weren't sure that Carlos wasn't about to come roaring back. But at the Open, I just had the feeling at a certain point, especially once Alcaraz got the first break of the 3rd set, that he was just going to be unstoppable. And Sinner's mood seemed kind of negative. He seemed kind of downcast. And he revealed that afterwards with his comments, because he hasn't said anything like that after a lot of these other losses to Carlos, mainly because you had that Roland Garros with the 3 match points. You had Beijing last year where he was up 3-zip in the last set tiebreak, serving at 3-love in that breaker and never won another point. So you had so many matches that were suspenseful, gripping, high quality, and he couldn't come away from those feeling like he hadn't played well. He just could be frustrated that he couldn't close Carlos out. But this was different, and his thinking was different afterwards. And so it's going to be really interesting going forward. And Carlos wisely painted it more like he was very diplomatic and painted it as a really good day for him, and talked about how he and Sinner divided the 4 majors again. And he didn't approach. But he did also add that he'd spent a good 2 weeks before Cincinnati pointing towards Sinner. Every practice session, everything thinking about Sinner and what he needed to do. He was obsessed with that. And he looked at the tape right after Wimbledon with his coaches. So these guys are so professional, Adam. And but my concern, I want to see Sinner be able to hold his own. I don't want to see that, say, the next 10 matches, Carlos wins 8 or 9 of them. I'd like to see it be a bit more evenly divided. For the sake of the sport, I think it would be better, because inevitably they're going to keep meeting on big occasions. Novak's 38 now, and even he was saying afterwards he's not sure if he can beat these guys in best of 5 anymore. And we had an injury to Ben Shelton, who's been one of the most improved players of the year. We'll see what happens to Ben next year. He's made progress, but is he ready to get into one of the finals against either one of these guys? I don't know. Draper, same thing. So the likelihood is that Alcaraz and Sinner next year meet at least again meet at least 3 times in Grand Slam finals. That would be my guess, given their current status and standing in the game and how much better they've been than everybody else. I would lean toward that. But that being the case, it's more interesting. I mean, this year was fascinating because you went from Alcaraz escaping in 5 in Paris and somehow miraculously pulling out a match in 5 sets, to Sinner coming from behind to win in 4 at Wimbledon, to Alcaraz winning in 4 at the Open. Okay, it's back and forth, but still in between. Sinner got sick in Cincinnati, was down 5-love to Alcaraz, had to lose that match, had to walk off and retire at 5-love down. So it now means that 7 of the last 8 times, Sinner had led the rivalry 4-3. Now Alcaraz leads at 10-5. That's a pretty healthy lead. So I for the rooting for the sport, rooting for the rivalry, I'm rooting for more Sinner victories only for that reason, because I admire them both tremendously, and they're both great representatives of the sport.
All well said, Steve. And I think to go to your last point, I think tennis is in good hands. You do need 2 champions pushing each other. I was recently listening to John McEnroe talk about the year that he finished 82 and 3. Yeah,
82 and 3,
right.
Yeah.
And
that was 1984, by the way.
1984, and he said that he wished he had pushed himself harder after those years, because he kind of sat back a little bit and said, let's see what they're going to bring to me. It also hurt him, as you know, the loss of Borg. So I think
although in fairness, Adam, to the point that he was making to you, by 84, Bjorn was gone. So John had adjusted enough to have his greatest season in 84. He felt that more earlier when Bjorn left after that 81 U.S. Open and disappeared from the sport. He just disappeared from the ceremony to start with, the final round, and then left tennis pretty much. And so, I think John's right about that. By the way, just to reference what you're saying, I think he's right. He needed to keep his foot on the pedal after 84, but he tended to do that, Adam. You go back to 81, he wins Wimbledon, U.S. Open, leads the U.S. to victory in the Davis Cup, and everybody thought, oh boy, watch out for this guy. And Bjorn was in the forefront of that argument that John was too good. And then what happens the next year? Connors comes back, beats McEnroe in the Wimbledon final, and Lendl beats McEnroe at the U.S. Open, and then loses to Connors. So Connors actually wins both. And that was not the year he stayed at number 1, but only because he won so many other tournaments, but he didn't come through in the majors. So it was a disappointing season. And then he did come back and win Wimbledon in 83 and had a good year. And then he had the great 84, which was really kind of the end of his run at the Grand Slam tournaments in singles. But I'm glad you mentioned that.
Right. I mentioned that. I mean, I was listening to McEnroe, honestly, on Andy Roddick Served. And for the key point of, you got to have that rival to push you to your heights. And now let's turn a little bit, Steve, if you don't mind, to the ladies.
Well, just quickly.
Sure.
He did in 84 in a sense. He had Connors who had frustrated him by beating John in 5 in the 82 Wimbledon final and kept going. But in 84, he beat Jimmy in the finals with the French, and then he beat him he crushed him in the best match he ever played, 1-1 and 2 in the Wimbledon final, and then he beat Jimmy in 5 at the U.S. Open. So their rivalry had sort of been revitalized in a way, and then he still had Lendl too, whom he beat in the U.S. Open final. So he did have those rivals that brought out the best of him in 84, those 2 guys.
Sure. Well, let's turn to the ladies' final, if you don't mind, Steve. You had Sabalenka, Anisimova, and it's a very interesting matchup to have Anisimova in back-to-back slam finals. Anisimova coming off a double bagel to Swiatek, and then beating Swiatek for the ultimate the ultimate revenge, if you will, for lack of a better
And
term.
Adam, not just beating her, but beating her 6-4, 6-3 in Arthur Ashe Stadium.
Yeah.
Astounding turnaround. It'd be one thing if she'd squeezed it out in a tiebreak in the third, but she was the much better player on the day. She frustrated Iga. She was just beating her to the punch. They didn't have many long rallies, but she was the better player off the ground, and her backhand was so magnificent the whole tournament. And that shot more than anything was what beat Iga. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up, because to me it was a startling performance from beginning to end, and she just didn't waver. And Iga was disappointed because she had won a tournament over the summer on the hard courts, had a Cincinnati win, and she thought she was primed for this Open, and actually she was for it. But Anisimova just, and again, I don't think Iga went out there, by the way, thinking, okay, I beat her love and love at Wimbledon, this is going to be no problem. She knew it would be tough, but I still think she thought she was going to win. And she didn't come close. And that's all credit to Anisimova. I really think Anisimova won that match. We often talk, Adam, and you've heard the old expression, tennis matches are lost, not won, because it can often be one player's errors that lead to his or her demise, and the other player just exploits that by playing solid tennis. But Iga did not beat herself that day. Anisimova really outplayed her thoroughly.
So your take on the final Anisimova Sabalenka, where do you go with that?
Well, first, as I referenced earlier, first she had that uplifting win over Naomi Osaka, such a hard-fought battle where she lost a tiebreak in the first after Naomi had served for the first set, and then she came back and won the second in a tiebreak, beat her 6-3 in the third. That was a very inspiring win for her to propel her into the final. And it was enough so that I must admit, because I already said I picked Carlos in 4 by my last projection, but I thought Anisimova was going to beat Sabalenka.
Really?
Not because I thought Sabalenka was playing badly. No, I just thought Anisimova was so good in the quarters and semis against Iga and Naomi that I thought she would follow it through and be ready for this one. And frankly, I think she was ready, but Sabalenka was more ready. And you had an interesting first set where Sabalenka got the quick break for 2-love, and then Anisimova broke her twice to go up 3-2. And at that stage, you're thinking, boy, she might win this set. And if she wins this set, is there any way will Sabalenka be able to turn this around? Instead, Sabalenka made a steadfast stand. She got better and better off the ground. Her serve with pinpoint accuracy, and she wins those last 4 games of the first set, which was crucial. It took that set 6-3. And then second set, Anisimova put up a great fight because Sabalenka was up 3-1, and Anisimova brought it back to 3-all. Then we had Sabalenka break again and serve for the match at 5-4 and got to 30-all and missed a fairly routine overhead. I think she had too much time to think about it. It was a very high defensive lob. And so it just she hadn't played many overheads. And I think she knew if she makes this overhead, she's at match point. But instead, she missed it into the net and lost her serve. And then Anisimova held. So the next thing you know, you got Sabalenka serving at 5-6, and you're wondering whether Anisimova might be able to run out the set, take it into 3, and she was going to be very dangerous if it got to 3 because the crowd, Anisimova being an American, I mean, Sabalenka's had to deal with a lot of that out of at the U.S. Open the last couple of years. Yeah. Pegula in the finals last year, Pegula in the semis this year, and Anisimova in the finals. So 2 years in a row playing an American in the final. But Sabalenka really showed her class at 5-6 with a very comfortable hold and got it into the tiebreak. Anisimova starts off with an ace. But then the next 6 points were won by Sabalenka, who's now won 19 tiebreaks in a row. It's utterly insane. And she kind of defines herself with her clutch play in those tiebreaks because that's really been pendulum swinging. It's really been pivotal in so many of her victories. Sometimes it goes the other way. She won a tiebreak against Coco in the first set of the French, and she didn't win that match. But much more often than not, winning a tiebreak has led to her winning a big match. Sure. And here was the perfect example. And it was such an appropriate way for her to close out defense of her U.S. Open title. Because think about the year, the frustration, losing to Keys 7-5 in the third in the Australian final, losing in the French final to Coco in 3 sets after winning the first, and then losing to Anisimova at Wimbledon in the semis in another really tight 3-setter. So I think in in Sabalenka's mind, she should have won at least 2 of those 3 matches, and in her mind, she should have already had at least 1 major this year and maybe 2. So that's why I think she was so sharply focused on this U.S. Open, and why she didn't lose a set until she played Pegula. And Pegula, that was a great comeback from her because it was 4-2 for Sabalenka, and Pegula won 4 games in a row to steal that first set before Sabalenka came back to win a stirring third set, 6-4. So very worthy champion, validates her number 1 ranking, which, I mean, she's been at the top pretty much all year long. And it was just her inability to win a major. That was the only thing missing. Now she got it. And I think it's going to carry her forward, and I expect her to win at least 1, maybe 2 next year. And I thought it was a good effort. She had a lot of pressure on her, Adam. This was a internal as well, not really so much from the outside, but just so determined that she would finally get on the board this year. And also knowing, though, that the other players had seen her falter just a bit in some of those other tight finals and semifinals at the 3 preceding majors. So they maybe, in a sense, went out there thinking that they had a decent chance. But I really admired that. I thought it was a very stellar performance from Sabalenka in the final. A great performance.
Yeah, I saw this as a must-win for Sabalenka. In light of the frustrations, you don't know how many major finals you're going to get to in your career, let alone in 1 year. 1 year. You got to take that one. So
yeah, I agree with that. I agree with you. But I would only slightly disagree in the sense I think she could know that she could be pretty confident that she'll have chances in the future. But it would have made this year frustrating. The frustrating year. So I think it was more about this year and making sure she salvaged one of the premier prizes, which she did, and then that can carry her forward. So it makes sense, Adam. Look, we saw 4 different winners for the women this year at the majors. Keys with that phenomenal Australian Open where she beat Swiatek and Sabalenka back to back. We saw Coco come through at the French, so 2 American champions back to back at the majors. Then we saw Wimbledon where Iga, the revival of Iga with the incredible final round performance against Anisimova, and now Sabalenka. There have been other years where we've seen 4 different winners, Adam, and it's made me a bit concerned that the women, there's too much musical chairs. I don't feel that way at all about this year because they were all worthy winners. For Madison, it may well turn out to be that one moment, that one golden moment that she'd been searching for her whole career. And if it is, she's got nothing to be ashamed about. If she does come through in another, all power to her. But my sense is that might have been her one and only. And then you had Coco winning her 2nd major after winning the U.S. Open a couple of years ago. So she's no longer in the One Slam Club, which I know has to thrill her. And then you had Iga come back to win her first Wimbledon. She's got 4 French and she's got a U.S., so she's got 6 altogether now. But I think it was thrilling to her to win Wimbledon, which coming into, she'd been in a grass court final, which she lost to Pegula before Wimbledon. But I don't think she really liked her chances coming to the tournament, but she got on a great roll and won that. And Iga, of course, has spent a lot of time at number 1. And then we had the player that has been number 1 this year, Sabalenka, win the last of the majors. So it was a great storyline all around for those 4 players, and a very good year for women's tennis to have those 4 majors decided in that fashion.
Well, I'm gonna move around a little bit, Steve, but with again, of course, the focus on the 25 U.S. Open. But
Sure.
I was intrigued, in particular, by Taylor Townsend in this tournament, by her singles success. Loses a heartbreaker, 8 match points against Krejcikova.
Yeah.
Brutal. Preceded by a kind of a rough situation with Ostapenko. At a handshake that was kind of rough. She was number 1 in doubles. She gets to the doubles final. I think she's a very interesting late career success story. So, Steve, you've seen it all. Your take on Taylor Townsend and her U.S. Open and her status of her career?
Look, it was a great U.S. Open. She beat Andreeva, the number 5 seed. That was a really nice win. Sure. And she beat her 5-2. And then the Krejcikova match. Listen, Krejcikova, you could say she stole it from her. I mean, the 8 match points, but if you looked at them, there was really only one that you felt like Taylor might have missed an opening for a forehand pass. Otherwise, 5 winners. 5 of the 8 match points were just outright winners from Krejcikova. She played incredibly boldly and magnificently under pressure. So I think Taylor understood that based on her remarks in the press conference after. She got it. So she won't beat herself up because she could well have won that match in straight. Instead, she loses in 3, but it's still a great tournament. She's still losing in the round of 16 in singles.
Right.
And maybe that will encourage her to play more singles and to devote herself more to it, in addition to the fact that she's the best doubles player in the world. So I thought the crowd over on the grandstand, on Armstrong, excuse me, it was on Armstrong. The crowd in Armstrong was just so euphoric and trying to pull her through, which again made Krejcikova's performance all the more remarkable. Because she could have folded under pressure. You would have thought there would have been a bit more tension surfacing when it counted. It didn't happen at all. She just came up with the most dazzling shots at the most opportune moments and earned that victory. But it didn't diminish Taylor's tournament, and I think she should be very proud of it. And I do think it might kind of alter her thinking now, alter her outlook, to the point where she'll say, I don't have to just make my living solely on, I've been making my living almost entirely on doubles. It doesn't have to be that way.
Right. She played the mixed doubles.
Right.
She got into the finals in women's doubles.
Yeah.
Round of 16. She had that, had to traverse kind of some rocky controversy involving Ostapenko, which we don't necessarily have to get deeply into. But
suffices to say that Taylor handled an awkward situation very well, so
right.
that controversy was sort of ended up dying out rather quickly, and Ostapenko then finally, a little late, but at least she finally issued an apology. So that turned out fine, and it wouldn't have been the case if she hadn't handled it so well. It reminds me of an incident way back in 2001 with James Blake and Hewitt.
I know exactly where you're going with that, Steve.
Yeah, and the linesman and the footfall call and Leighton saying some things that were very regrettable about the linesman, and James did not exploit it. James gave Leighton the benefit of the doubt. That's really what Taylor was doing. She didn't like Ostapenko's reaction, making a comment to her at match point like that at the net afterwards and questioning her, but she handled it well. She didn't inflame. Right. So again, that was another shining moment for Taylor Townsend. Right. The way she handled that controversy.
Yeah, I thought Taylor took the high road and essentially said people say things when they lose. She's not a graceful loser, but we'll move on from there.
Exactly. That's exactly what she said, and it was honorable that she did it because she just understood. As a fellow competitor, she understood, and she just did not want to. She didn't want to exploit it. She didn't want to milk it. She didn't want to just pile it on. She knew that Ostapenko was already getting criticized severely in the press and over the airwaves. So she just didn't want to add to that.